He was the face of two of the biggest shows on television. MacGyver made him a global icon. Stargate SG-1 turned him into sci-fi royalty. At his peak, he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars per episode, had action figures made in his image, and could walk into any room in Hollywood and get a green light. But behind the smile, the stunts, and the success was a man falling apart. His body was broken, his mind was exhausted, and his heart focused entirely on the one thing Hollywood didn't care about: his daughter. This is the story of Richard Dean Anderson, not just the TV hero, but the real man who gave it all up. The fortune, the fame, the fantasy. He vanished from the spotlight, turned down over $23 million in offers, and walked away from an industry that nearly destroyed him. Why? Because being a father was more important than being a legend. Before the duct tape, before the wormholes, before the action hero, there was a boy with skates strapped to his feet and ice in his veins. Richard Dean Anderson grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a place where winters stretch on forever and frozen lakes become the local playground. For Richard, hockey wasn't just a sport. It was identity, escape, and ambition rolled into one. Early mornings meant lacing up skates in the dark. Afternoons were filled with drills, bruises, and frozen breath hanging in the air. Friends remember him as quiet but determined, a kid who believed the NHL wasn't a dream but a destination, and for a time it seemed inevitable. He had the speed, the discipline, the mindset. Coaches whispered about college scouts. The pro track wasn't a fantasy. It was being laid out right in front of him. In a house of 4 boys, hockey was the lifeblood, and Richard was the one pushing hardest. Then came the first injury, a collision on the ice, the sickening snap of bone, a broken arm, months in a cast. He trained through pain, determined to return stronger. But fate wasn't done. Only weeks after recovery, another brutal accident, a second broken arm, this time even worse. 2 arms, 2 breaks, 1 year. The dream evaporated almost overnight. Scouts stopped calling, teams stopped asking. At just 16, Richard's future, everything he'd built his identity around, was gone. No pro league, no NHL, no second chance. He later admitted that this was the first time he truly understood loss, not just of opportunity, but of self. It left a hole, a quiet kind of grief. He wasn't just injured. He was unmoored. Hockey had been his compass, and now the needle spun wildly. What do you do when the only thing you're good at is suddenly impossible? After the dream of hockey was shattered, Richard Dean Anderson entered a period he would later describe as beautifully lost. There was no grand plan, no clear next step, just a restless energy and a deep need to feel something again. He drifted, not out of laziness, but out of quiet disorientation. The future he'd mapped out was gone, so he started wandering. He enrolled at St. Cloud State University, dabbling in music, art, and drama. But nothing stuck. Not yet. The classrooms felt too rigid, the structure too suffocating for a mind that had just watched its entire framework collapse. He transferred to Ohio University, then left, then returned to Minnesota. It wasn't rebellion. It was a search, a slow, uncertain one. In between classes, he took odd jobs to make ends meet. Some of them were almost absurd: street mime, juggler, even a professional whale feeder at an aquatic zoo. But these weren't aimless gigs. Each one scratched at something deeper. Richard wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing feeling. He was learning how to connect with people again, how to tell a story without words, how to perform without needing a script. And that's when something clicked. Not suddenly, not in a flash of genius, but slowly, like a lens coming into focus. He started performing in local theater productions, small roles, cheap venues, sparse audiences. But he lit up. For the first time since hockey, he felt alive in motion. The applause wasn't what moved him. It was the chance to disappear into another life, even for just an hour. There was no master plan to become a star, no dream of Hollywood. Acting wasn't a career move. It was a survival instinct, a way to stop feeling like a failure and start feeling present. Still, something inside him knew. This path, strange as it was leading somewhere. He just had no idea where it would take him next. By the early 1980s, Richard Dean Anderson had found something resembling momentum. He'd landed a steady role as Dr. Jeff Weber on General Hospital, a daytime soap opera with a fiercely loyal following. It wasn't exactly fulfilling artistically, but it gave him what most young actors don't get: visibility and stability. He was in front of millions of viewers every week, earning a paycheck, getting fan mail. But deep down, he knew he was still playing it safe. He didn't want to be a soap star. He wanted to create something that lasted, something different. Then came a strange script, low budget, odd concept, a lead character who didn't use guns, didn't throw punches, and solved problems with science instead of violence. At first glance, MacGyver looked like a gamble, but Richard saw something others didn't. He didn't see an action hero. He saw a thinker, a reluctant adventurer, a guy who wasn't trying to be cool. He just was. He auditioned. The producers were hesitant. Richard wasn't what they imagined. He was scruffier, goofier, more laid back than the polished, stoic lead they had in mind. But there was something in his eyes, something calm, capable, and curious. They took the risk, and that's when Richard Dean Anderson became MacGyver. The show debuted in 1985, and almost instantly, it struck a nerve. This wasn't just another shoot-'em-up series. MacGyver wasn't built like Rambo or invincible like James Bond. He was the guy who looked at a ticking time bomb and asked, "Is there a paperclip nearby?" He turned household items into life-saving tools. He made intelligence heroic, and Richard embodied that perfectly. He brought a kind of grounded charm to the role, equal parts serious and self-aware. He wasn't trying to be a superhero. He was just trying to solve the next problem, and people loved him for it. Teachers played MacGyver clips in classrooms. Kids started carrying Swiss Army knives in their backpacks. The term MacGyver became a verb. But while the world saw a clever, unshakable hero on screen, few saw what was happening behind the camera. Richard insisted on doing most of his own stunts, not to prove anything, but because he wanted the audience to believe it. The running, the diving, the jumping from rooftops. It was all him. Week after week, year after year. No CGI, no body doubles. Just grit and repetition. And it came at a cost. For 7 seasons, MacGyver was a global sensation. But for Richard Dean Anderson, the success came with a silent cost that no one saw. Not the fans, not the producers, not even Richard himself, until it was too late. Behind the scenes, the physical strain was constant. He wasn't just acting like he was in danger. He was in danger. The explosions were real. The chase scenes were real. The injuries, very real. He'd insisted on doing most of his own stunts, not out of vanity, but out of commitment. He believed the audience deserved authenticity. But the toll it took was cumulative, unforgiving, and invisible. Until one day it wasn't. In 1991, during the show's final stretch, Richard's body gave out. Mid-shoot, surrounded by crew and cameras, he collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic TV fall. It was quiet, sudden. His body had reached its limit, and it simply stopped. It should have been a turning point, a pause, a wake-up call to slow down and recover. But instead, it became something far darker. According to Richard, the response from the production wasn't sympathy. It was survival. For them, the studio panicked. With millions invested and contracts still in motion, they threatened him with something unthinkable. An $18 million lawsuit if he didn't return to finish the season. No therapy. No rehab. Just a deadline. He was exhausted, injured, and now, trapped. Imagine that. You're not just physically broken, you're emotionally cornered, and the very machine you helped build is now pushing you back into the fire because you're too valuable to let rest. He finished the season. Somehow. But something changed in him after that. The trust was gone. The joy was gone. And for the first time, he saw fame not as a gift, but as a cage. One that looked golden from the outside, but on the inside felt cold and unforgiving. The show would end in 1992, just 1 year later. But by then, the damage had been done. His knees were shot. His back was failing. And his soul quietly slipping away. In 1997, Anderson signed on as Colonel Jack O'Neill in Stargate SG-1, a show inspired by the 1994 movie. What started as a sci-fi experiment turned into a decade-long phenomenon. It was funnier, darker, and more emotional than people expected. And Richard, he wasn't just the face of the show. He shaped it. He helped design his character's sarcasm, his realism, his emotional walls, and audiences loved it. At the peak of Stargate, he was earning up to $200,000 per episode. The show aired for 10 seasons. Spin-offs followed. Merchandise, conventions, global recognition. It was a second wave of stardom. But the exhaustion came with it. This time, it wasn't just about the injuries. It was emotional, existential. He was older, tired, questioning everything. And then something happened that put it all in perspective. In 1998, his daughter Wiley was born. But the birth wasn't easy. It was traumatic. Complications, scares, a visceral, emotional experience that left Richard completely shattered and completely reborn. He described that moment as a total awakening. Suddenly, none of it mattered. Not the ratings, not the money, not the agents or contracts. He just wanted to be there, to be a father, not a TV dad, not a stunt double. Her dad. So he made a bold move. He negotiated an unheard-of deal, a 3-day work week on Stargate, just so he could fly home and spend the rest of his week with Wiley. No one had done that before. Not in sci-fi, not in prime time. But he didn't care. Because for the first time, he wasn't living to perform. He was performing just enough to live. By 2013, Richard Dean Anderson quietly walked away from Hollywood. No big announcement, no farewell tour. He simply disappeared. He was 63, and the offers didn't stop. Between 2023 and 2025 alone, he reportedly turned down over $23 million in reboot and cameo deals, including a single $15 million Netflix offer to reprise MacGyver in a gritty miniseries. He said no to all of it. Instead, he moved to a 5-acre farm in Malibu, worth over $9.5 million. He grows vegetables, he rescues dogs, he surfs, and he spends as much time with his daughter as possible. He also became an outspoken environmental activist, quietly, not on social media, not for applause, just for the planet. And then, in 2025, at a rare fan convention, he said something that echoed across the industry. Hollywood is a soul-killing machine. And he meant it. Today, at 75, Richard Dean Anderson lives almost completely off the grid. No interviews, no cameos, no flashy lifestyle. Just calm. And while he's never fully closed the door on acting, it's clear. He doesn't need it anymore. He got his answers. He found his worth. And most importantly, he kept his soul intact. And maybe that's the biggest plot twist of all. He spent decades saving the world on screen, MacGyvering his way out of explosions and intergalactic invasions. But the greatest thing he ever saved was himself. Like this story, smash that like button. It helps more people discover untold stories like this. Subscribe for more cinematic deep dives into the icons you thought you knew. And in the comments, tell us this. What would you walk away from if it meant finally finding peace?